The Polar Express by Chris Van Allsburg.
On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh.
There is no Santa.
My friend insisted, but I knew she was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door.
All aboard!
The conductor cried out. I ran up to him.
Well,
He said,
are you coming?
"Where?" I asked.
Why, to the North Pole, of course.
Was his answer.
This is the Polar Express.
I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon, there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills into snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea.
There
Said the conductor.
is the North Pole.
The North Pole! It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, we saw no elves.
They are gathering at the center of the city.
The conductor told us.
That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas.
Who receives the first gift? We all asked. The conductor answered.
You will choose one of you.
Look! Shouted one of the children.
The elves!
Outside, we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed down to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart, and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly.
Yay! Santa! He's the best person ever!
Santa marched over to us and, pointing to me, said,
"Let's have this fellow here."
He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked,
Now, what would you like for Christmas?
I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. Then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood holding the bell high above him and called out,
The first gift of Christmas.
A clock struck midnight as they roared their approval.
Yay!
Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us. then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa Claus's sleigh.
Let's go outside and look for it.
One of the children said, but the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. What? I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth.
Merry Christmas!
He shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note.
Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket.
Signed,
Mr. C.
I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said,
Oh, that's too bad.
Yes,
said my father.
it's broken.
When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me as it does for all who truly believe.
The end. The Latka Who Couldn't Stop Screaming. A Christmas Story by Lemony Snicket. The story ends in someone's mouth, but it begins in a tiny village more or less covered in snow. The snow had fallen during the long night during which the children had pressed their faces to the windows looking for the glimpse of a man who they suspected of bringing them wonderful gifts. But instead, they heard a terrible noise from a certain cottage in the neighboring arrondissement, a word which here means place where something was being born. This cottage was already regarded with some suspicion, as it was the only place not decorated with flashy colored lights at this time of year. The thing that was being born was a latke, a word which here means potato pancake. Latkes are a traditional part of the celebration of Hanukkah, a holiday commemorating a miraculous Jewish military victory. Nearly everything in this world is born screaming, and the latke was no exception. Even though the latke wasn't conceived and born the way you and I were conceived and born, but instead was fashioned from grated potatoes, chopped onions, beaten eggs, and a dash or two of salt. Once these ingredients were properly mixed, the latke was slapped into a pan full of olive oil and heated to a very high temperature. And this is when it began to scream.
Ah! Ah!
The latke was suffering so much that it leapt out of the hot pan and out of the window of the cottage and began to run screaming down the boulevard.
Ah!
This may seem like unusual behavior for a potato pancake, but this is a Christmas story in which things tend to happen that would never occur in real life. The latke ran past a row of flashing colored lights which hung from the rain cutters of a less suspicious cottage.
What's all the ruckus?
Said the lights in unison.
We're the ones who are supposed to be dominating the neighborhood with our cheerful glow. I was just thrown into a pan of boiling oil.
The latke replied.
Can you believe it?
Yes,
Said the flashing colored lights.
but we can't imagine why.
Because I'm a latke.
Said the latke.
The olive oil reminds us of the oil used to rededicate the temple following the defeat of Antiochus at the hands of the Maccabees. The oil was only supposed to last for one night, but there was a miracle, and it lasts for 8. Plus, frying makes my skin crispy and brown.
So you're basically hash browns.
Said the flashing colored lights.
Maybe you can be served alongside the Christmas ham.
I am not hash browns.
Cried the Latka.
I'm something completely different.
The Latka rounded the corner and found itself face to face with the candy cane, which wrinkled its red and white nose at the Latka in distaste.
I'm trying to sprinkle the night air with my peppermint scent.
Said the candy cane.
Your mouth-watering smell, not to mention all that yelping, is spoiling the effect.
My mouth-watering smell is part of the cozy feeling of Hanukkah.
The Latka replied.
It reminds us that things are better now than they were in 175 BCE, when my people were not allowed to practice their religion. In order to study the Talmud, they had to hide out in caves. And when they heard Greek soldiers approach, they pretended they were gambling with a small spinning top called a dreidel.
Sort of like Joseph and Mary hiding out in a manger.
Said the candy cane.
Someone should write a Christmas carol about you.
I'm not part of Christmas.
Cried the Latka.
It's a totally different thing.
The screams of the Latka grew quieter and quieter as the pancake ran out of the village into the surrounding forest. Its utter fury was unabated, a phrase which here means the Latka was still very annoyed at the objects to whom it had spoken, but it was quite tired, and so it decided to rest for a few minutes beneath the branches of a little pine tree. The pine tree was napping, but woke up at the sound of an object plopping down at its feet.
Are you a present?
The pine tree asked.
Presents are pretty much the only thing allowed to sit beneath me this time of year.
The Latka sighed.
Presents aren't really a big part of Hanukkah.
It said in a voice hoarse from screaming.
There's nothing wrong with giving presents to loved ones, of course, but it's more important to light the candles for 8 consecutive nights, to commemorate the miracle in the temple and the miracle of victory, even when you were thoroughly outnumbered, so you shouldn't give up hope.
Plus, Santa Claus.
Said the pine tree. The Latka was too exhausted to scream.
Santa has nothing to do with it.
The Latka said.
Christmas and Hanukkah are completely different things.
But different things can often blend together.
Said the pine tree.
Let me tell you a funny story about pagan rituals.
Before the pine tree could begin its story, a family came trooping through the snow, searching the forest carefully.
We shouldn't have waited until the last minute to get ready for the holiday.
Said the father of the family, who was holding an axe.
We'll never find a good one.
You shouldn't give up hope.
Said the mother, and pointed at the pine tree.
Oh, look.
It's perfect.
Said the daughter.
Beautiful.
Agreed the son.
Such a marvelous shape.
Said the mother.
And its skin looks so crispy.
Said the father, and reached down and scooped up the latke from the snow.
We'll need to reheat it, of course, but this will be perfect for Hanukkah dinner with a topping of applesauce, sour cream, or even jam.
I'll refry it in oil
Said the mother.
to remind us of the rededication of the temple.
And the triumph of the Maccabees over Antiochus.
Added the daughter.
After hiding in the caves all that time.
The son chimed in. The father smiled down at the latke in his mitten and then stared curiously at his other hand.
What was I thinking bringing this axe?
He said to himself. The family strolled back to the village, walking past all the cottages with flashing colored lights and smiling politely at the candy canes until they reached their own home. The family carried the latke into their own home, which was warm and cozy, and sat down at the table, which was lit with the flickering candles of the menorah, which is a branched candelabra designed specifically for the holiday. It is very frustrating not to be understood in this world. If you say one thing and keep being told that you mean something else, it can make you want to scream. But somewhere in the world, there is a place for all of us, whether you're an electric form of decoration, peppermint-scented sweet, a source of timber, or a potato pancake. On a cold, snowy night, everyone and everything should be welcomed somewhere. And the Latka was welcomed into the home full of people who understood what a Latka is and how it fits into this particular holiday. And then they ate it.
Delicious.
The end.
The Santa Trap by Jonathan Emmett and Polly Bernadine. Bradley Bartleby was bad. He'd been born bad. Before baby Bradley even left the hospital, he'd bitten the midwife on the bottom, stolen the doctor's stethoscope, and emptied his diaper into his grandmother's handbag. And the older Bradley got, the badder he became. Bradley's parents were immensely rich. They had a huge house with a garden that was big enough to lose an elephant in it. They knew that the garden was big enough to lose an elephant in because they had done just that. Bradley had demanded the elephant as a house pet and had treated it so badly that it escaped into the garden and was never seen again. Bradley's parents always gave him what he demanded, not because they thought he deserved it, but because they were terrified of him. Every Christmas, Mr. Bartleby hired a team of secretaries to type up the huge list of presents that his greedy son demanded from Santa Claus. Now, of course, Santa knew what a beastly brat Bradley was, so he never looked at the list. But that didn't mean that he forgot about Bradley completely. Santa is such a kind-hearted old fellow that he believes that no child, even one as bad as Bradley, should go without a Christmas present. So every Christmas morning, Bradley would discover that Santa had left him the same small gift.
Socks!
Howled Bradley.
Another pair of stupid socks!
Never
mind, Bradley dear.
Cried Mr. and Mrs. Bartleby as they rushed in with a trolley load of presents.
Look, Mommy and Daddy have got you everything you wanted.
But I don't want presents from you!
Roared Bradley.
I want presents from Santa Claus like everyone else!
And he stormed back to his room. Next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bartleby were alarmed to discover that their son had climbed up inside the living room chimney. They were even more alarmed to discover that Bradley had nailed several sticks of dynamite around the chimney walls.
What are you doing, dear?
Asked Mrs. Bartleby nervously.
What does it look like?
Scowled Bradley.
I'm building a trap!
A trap.
Said Mr. Bartleby.
A trap for what?
For Santa Claus!
Snarled Bradley.
I'm going to catch that fat fool and take every present he's got!
Mr. and Mrs. Bartleby were speechless. In a lifetime of badness, this was quite the baddest thing that Bradley had ever tried to do. Mr. Bartleby was the first to come to his senses.
Isn't it a little early to be setting a trap?
He gasped.
Be a whole year before Santa comes again.
Oh, this is only the beginning!
Scoffed Bradley.
It'll take a whole year to finish it all!
And he was right. Bradley spent the rest of the winter fixing dynamite inside all the other chimneys, and the spring training tigers, which he stole from the local zoo. He spent the summer fitting guillotines over the doors and windows, and the autumn cutting trap doors into all the floors. By the time December came around again, Bradley had turned the entire house into one stupendous Santa trap. By Christmas Eve, their home was so dangerous that Mr. and Mrs. Bartleby had moved out into a hotel, leaving Bradley alone in the house.
One last thing.
Said Bradley as he hung his stocking beside the fireplace. He was certain that Santa wouldn't make it that far, but just to make sure, he tied an invisible tripwire to the stocking. The moment anyone touched it, a large metal cage would drop down from above.
No more stupid socks.
Thought Bradley.
This Christmas, I'll get exactly what I want. This Christmas, I'll get the whole lot.
But as the evening grew darker, Bradley's eyelids grew heavier. His evil efforts had left him quite exhausted, and soon he fell fast asleep. It was almost midnight when Bradley was awakened by the roar of an angry tiger whose tail had been stepped on by an elephant. The house had grown chilly. When he looked outside, Bradley was surprised to find the garden covered in a thick blanket of snow. Shivering with cold, Bradley decided to light a fire. It was only when the flames began to lick up the chimney that Bradley remembered the dynamite.
Boom!
The explosion blew Bradley right through the living room window and out into the rose bushes below. Cursing loudly, Bradley struggled to free of the thorny stems. He had barely caught his breath when 6 sleek, stripy shapes came bounding toward him out of the snow.
Nice kitty.
Squealed Bradley as he fled back through the rose bushes with the tiger snapping at his heels. The tigers chased Bradley around the garden twice before he was able to lose them by diving into a heap of fresh elephant dung and creep back into the house. Determined not to be caught in any more of his own traps, Bradley took a deep breath and prepared himself before opening the front door.
Aha!
He cried triumphantly as he leapt clear of the falling guillotine. He cried miserably as he fell through the trap door. Sometime later, as the sun rose on Christmas morning, a scratched, scraped, and badly bruised Bradley limped back to the living room. There wasn't much of a fireplace left, but amazingly, his stocking was still hanging up. And even more amazingly, Bradley could see that there was something inside. Bradley hobbled over, tore down the stocking, and
Clang!
the metal cage dropped right over him. Bradley let out a long sigh. He knew that he was beaten, so he slumped down inside the cage and emptied the stocking onto the floor. For the first time ever, Santa had left him more than one present. There was a big box of bandages, a large jar of antiseptic, and a nice new pair of socks. The end.
Llama Llama Holiday Drama by Anna Dudley. Llama Llama Holidays. Jingle music, lights ablaze, sparkly candles, yummy bread, dress up clothes in green and red.
How long till that special date?
Llama Llama has to wait. Llama Llama Holidays. Ads and signs and store displays. Fluffy snow and funny elves. Goodies piled high on shelves.
Just how many days to go?
Llama Llama wants to know.
Time to buy and search and shop.
Mama carries, Llama drops.
Buy a friend a rubber duck, a pirate ship or tractor truck, wooden blocks or building set.
What will Llama Llama get? Llama Llama Holidays. Hustle, bustle, cooking craze. Measure sugar, roll the dough. 10 more batches left to go.
How many more days again? The special day is coming when?
Take the cookies out to cool, frost a great big batch for school, add some sprinkles, almost done. Teacher gets the fancy one. No more cookies left to bake.
Llama Llama tummy ache. School has dreidels, songs and bells. Big red ribbons, woodsy smells.
Draw a snowman, make a star, decorate a candle jar.
Are there many days to go?
Llama time is going slow. Mama needs a present too. Get some sparkles, sticks, and glue.
Roll it up and wrap it how?
Llama wants to give it now. Llama Llama Holidays. Unpack stockings, unpack trays. Shiny silver fancy plates. Llama Llama waits, waits, waits. Cut out snowflakes, take them up. Pour some eggnog in a cup.
Oops, it's yucky on the floor.
Llama Llama waits some more.
Stringing lights is not much fun. How come Mama isn't done? Is the big day coming soon?
Llama Llama starts to swoon.
Oh, this waiting for one day. Time for presents right away. Too much music, too much fluff, too much baking, too much stuff.
Too much everything for Llama. Llama Llama holiday drama.
Come and listen, little llama. Have a cuddle with your mama. Sometimes we should take a rest and hold the ones we love the best. Wishing, waiting, wanting things, we forget what this time brings. Gifts are nice, but there's another. The true gift is we have each other.
Llama Llama warm and snug. gives a kiss, and gets a hug, snuggles close with Mama Llama. Happy holidays for Llama. The end.
Olive, the Other Reindeer by J. Otto Siebold and Vivian Walsh. Every day, Olive took her daily dog walk, winter, spring, summer, or fall. Today was Winter's Day. It was the holidays. There was music playing outdoors. People were singing along.
All of the other reindeer.
Olive was too shy to sing. She hummed. Back at her doghouse, Olive was wrapping presents and listening to the radio. She heard that same song again.
All of the other reindeer.
Went the song.
All of the other reindeer.
Olive sang along.
Olive, the reindeer? I thought it was a dog. I must be a reindeer.
It was this time of year when all reindeer reported to the North Pole to help Santa Claus. Olive put down her scissors carefully and marched out the door. She took one bus and then two buses. She got there just in time. Santa was checking his list for the second time. Elves were busy helping the reindeer and loading the sleigh with presents for all the good girls and boys. Everyone was getting ready to go. Olive took her place. Santa noticed that there was a little dog in the lineup. Santa knew a lot about dogs. For instance, they can't fly. But as it was time to go, he decided to give Olive a chance. Comet, the biggest reindeer, used a piece of extra ribbon to make sure Olive was tied in safe and tight. Now they were ready to go. Olive was surprised. It was so easy to fly. The other reindeer were very curious about the new helper. They looked at Olive so much, they weren't watching where they were going. Crash! They flew smack into the top of a too tall tree.
Oh dear,
Said Santa.
my sleigh is stuck in this tree. I'll have to cut it free.
Olive clung to the side of the tree. She tried to fly up to help Santa, but she could not. She climbed it slowly and started chewing. Chewing sticks was something Olive could do well.
Thank you, Olive.
Said Santa Claus as they got back on their way. They had not traveled far when Olive's nose began to twitch. Olive smelled trouble. It was the smell of gumdrop candies as they fell from the sleigh. Drop, drop, drop. Olive barked. And Santa knew what to do. He steered the reindeer down and around so that all of the gumdrops fell. Plop, 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 back into the toy set.
We were very lucky not to lose a single gumdrop,
Thought Olive. Then she heard a strange sound. It was a musical note. She spun around on her string to see the night sky filled with falling flutes. Olive had to howl louder than the wind instruments. This was not music to Santa's ears,
First gumdrops and now flutes.
thought Santa.
That tree must have torn a hole in my sled. Prepare for an emergency landing.
Santa instructed. The sleigh landed in a snowy field full of flutes. Luckily, Olive was very good at fetching sticks. It is something dogs love to do. Before Santa had finished patching the hole in the sleigh, Olive had returned each and every flute back to the set.
Ho, ho, ho!
Said Santa.
We're ready to go.
They were running late, but after a while, all the good children received their presents, and Santa and his team headed home. They were almost home when they got caught in the dreaded North Pole fog. The reindeer slowed down until it was only the breeze that moved them along. The fog was as thick as a pillow. It made everyone feel sleepy. Then Santa remembered something about dogs. They are expert smellers.
Olive, I'd hate to be late for breakfast this year.
He said.
Mrs. Claus has planned a parade of cookies. You can almost smell them, can't you?
Olive could smell the cookies.
Olive, Won't you guide my sleigh this morning?
asked Santa. Olive moved to the front of the reindeer. Thanks to Olive's nose and Mrs. Claus's baking, they made it all the way back to the North Pole. All of the elves sang out in cheer.
Hooray! Hooray! Santa and the reindeer and the little doggy are back!
Back at the North Pole, it was a glorious morning. After eating lots of good food, it was time to open presents. The reindeer got jump ropes, and the elves got toy trains. Santa reached into his toy sack. There was just one present left. It was for Olive. It was her very own set of reindeer antlers. They fit perfectly. Then everyone went outside to play reindeer games. The end.
How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, perhaps, that his shoes were too tight. But I think that the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, grinchy frown at the warm, lighted windows below in their town. For he knew every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now hanging a mistletoe wreath.
And they're hanging their stockings.
He snarled with a sneer.
Tomorrow is Christmas. It's practically here.
Then he growled, with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming.
I must find a way to stop Christmas from coming.
For tomorrow, he knew, all the Who girls and boys would wake bright and early. They'd rush for their toys. And then, oh, the noise. Oh, the noise, 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 noise. That's the one thing he hated. The noise, 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 noise. Then the Whos, young and old, would sit down to a feast. And they'd feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast, 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 feast. They would feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beast, which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together with Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. They'd sing, and they'd sing, and they'd sing, 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 sing. And the more Grinch thought of this Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought.
I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 53 years I have put up with it now. I must stop this Christmas from coming. But how?
Then he got an idea. An awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea.
I know just what to do.
The Grinch laughed in his throat. And he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked.
What a great Grinchy trick. With this coat and this hat, I look just like Saint Nick. All I need is a reindeer.
The Grinch looked around. But since reindeer are scarce, there was none to be found. Did that stop the old Grinch? No. The Grinch simply said,
If I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead.
So he called his dog Max.
Max!
Then he took some red thread and he tied a big horn on the top of his head. Then he loaded some bags and some old empty sacks on a ramshackle sleigh, and he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said,
Giddy up!
and the sleigh started down toward the homes where the Whos lay a snooze in their town. and their windows were dark. Quiet snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming sweet dreams without care when he came to the first little house on the square.
This is stop number 1.
The old Grinchy Claus hissed, and he climbed to the roof, empty bags in his fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch. But if Santa could do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once for a moment or two. Then he stuck his head out of the fireplace flue, where the little Who stockings all hung in a row.
These stockings
He grinned.
are the first thing to go.
Then he slithered and slunk with a smile most unpleasant around the whole room, and he took every present: pop guns and bicycles, roller skates, drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn, and plums. And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch very nimbly stuffed all the bags one by one up the chimbley. Then he slunk to the icebox. He took the Who's feast. He took the Who pudding. He took the roast beast. He cleaned out that icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took their last can of Who hash. Then he stuffed all the food up the chimney with glee.
And now
Grinned the Grinch.
I will stuff up the tree.
And the Grinch grabbed the tree, and he started to shove when he heard the small sound like a coo of a dove. Coo. He turned around fast, and he saw a small Who, little Cindy Lou Who was not more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter, who got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said,
Santa Claus, why? Why are you taking our Christmas tree away?
but you know that old Grinch was so smart and so slick, he thought up a lie, and he thought it up quick.
Why, my sweet little Todd,
The fake Santa Claus lied.
there's a light on this tree that won't light on one side. So I'm taking it home to my workshop, my dear. I'll fix it up there, then I'll bring it back here.
And this fib fooled the child. Then he patted her head, and he got her a drink, and he sent her to bed. And when Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup, he went to the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was the log for their fire. Then he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On their walls he left nothing but hooks and some wire. And the one speck of food that he left in the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same thing to the other Who's houses, leaving crumbs much too small for the other Who's mouses. It was 1:15. All the Who's still abed, all the Who's still a snooze when he packed up his sled. Packed it up with their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsel, the trimmings, the trappings. 3,000 feet up the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load to the tip-top to dump it.
Pooh-pooh to the Who's.
He was grinchiously humming.
They're finding out now that no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open for a minute or two. Then the Who's down in Whoville will all cry, boo-hoo. That's a noise
Grinned the Grinch.
that I simply must hear.
So he paused, and the Grinch put his hand to his ear. And he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad. Why, this sound sounded merry. It couldn't be so, but it was merry, very. He stared down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, were singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling.
But how could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags.
And he puzzled 3 hours until his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before.
Maybe Christmas
He thought,
doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, needs a little bit more.
and what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with the load through the bright morning light. And he brought back the toys and the food for the feast, and he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast feast. The end.